Welcome to the Body, Soul, and Spirit podcast. We've been talking about forgiveness in our last episode, and I want to make sure that we dive into it a little deeper and how it could lead us to so many other important emotional, mental health, and how key forgiveness is. We talked about the different kinds of forgiveness, and I was studying on forgiveness in one of my courses on the integration between mental health and the importance of mental health, physical well-being, as well as spiritual benefits. And I was studying, and there was this research done. It was back in like 2014, and it was Smith and Koenig, and they had done a study about the benefits of forgiveness as opposed to retaliation, as opposed to unforgiveness. And they suggested that spirituality is extremely beneficial when it comes to anything that has happened to us in the past. There is not a listener that has not had to forgive somebody. All of us have had to forgive those that maybe consciously or unconsciously have wronged us. And we're going to continue to need to forgive others in the future. But it's important because to really identify it, and I keep stressing this, right? This is part of, like, I believe something that I hold dear is that you can't separate body, soul, spirit. You just can't separate it. It's all intertwined. It's all connected. And when you add the spiritual component of forgiveness, it's so important because it doesn't lead us to retaliate. Unforgiveness is a very strong emotion. Unforgiveness leads us to so many other things. And when we don't link forgiveness into our spirit and link it into our soul, when we don't release it, and we talked about the different kinds of areas that we need to forgive. We need to forgive ourselves. We may need to forgive God. We may need to forgive others. And then we talked about the divine forgiveness, where God is not suggesting, but he is really commanding us to forgive others. And when you add all of those different types of forgiveness, and we talked about it last week, how forgiveness has to be a lifestyle. And when you choose that, it's a choice instead of retaliation, which will require me to add spirituality, because truthfully, I think everybody that's listening can vouch for this. It's hard to forgive. And so we can't really do it in our own effort. It really takes God to come in, step in, and help us forgive those that we're angry with. And anger, it's a very strong emotion. It's the tip of the iceberg, and that merits an entire podcast in itself. But when you allow God to help you forgive those that have wronged you, hurt you, or are still hurting you, you have to understand the power of forgiveness. Because, and I said it in my last podcast, and I want to repeat it. It's not just a spiritual component. For a long time, we've seen it as a spiritual component, but the more and the more I study, and, I'm in grad school and I study this forgiveness, how powerful it is. The more I realize it's not just spiritual, it's psychological, it's physical. They've done study after study, Smith and Koenig, and they found that all of these, the forgiveness aspect is linked with mental health. They found several things. They found that forgiveness was linked to mental health. Think about that. Mental health is so important. I was visiting my doctor this past week, and she was sharing with me, and she was giving me all my results, and we were going over my blood work. And something that she was sharing is she had just opened up her office, and I was so happy for her, and she was giving me a tour, and it was really awesome to see. And I was just sharing with her how we wanted to open up our clinic and whatnot. And she was sharing a lot of things with me. And she said, you know what? I have found with all my patients, she's a medical doctor, and she said, I have found that everybody needs some, at some point in their life, if not a continual, right, some form of help mentally, because she said, I attribute a lot of illnesses to a lot of mental breakdown. She said, I have seen in my patients that a lot of the sickness that is happening in their lives is because of a lack of mental health. And when she said that, I was remembering this study that I had looked into. And when you think about forgiveness, that's going to be the key. Everybody listening to me, you probably have already somebody in mind when you're listening to me that you know you need to forgive, at least this week, right? Or this month, or this year for that matter. But it's linked to your mental health. And it's linked, when you think about your mental health, it's key, because where the mind goes, the body goes. Where the mind goes, the life goes. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is. Your mental health is everything. You lose your mind, you're going to lose your life. And that's why we are told time and time again, biblically speaking, right? If we integrate the Bible now to our soul part of us, and we integrate that aspect of our spiritual side, you will find that scripture after scripture, we're told that we must renew the mind. Why? Because it is vital for the health of our mind. Now, they also found that it's linked to hope. When we lose hope, we end up in depression. I can't tell you how many DMs I received throughout the week of people that have lost hope. And they say things to me like, I just think about, and these are my prayers, God, just take me. God, just come for us. Because people have lost hope. And when you lose hope, there's this sense of hopelessness. There's a sense of helplessness. And it's probably because some kind of resentment has set in. Some kind of letdown has set in. Because you're looking at it from a scope of, I've been so disappointed. And typically when we lose hope, it's because there's disappointment, so much disappointment in life. You've had disappointment after disappointment, and it may not have been a false expectation that you have had in your life. It may have very well been like a good expectation, like you were hoping that this was going to happen, and for whatever reason it didn't. Life didn't turn out the way you expected, right? And so we lose hope. But believe it or not, forgiveness, forgiving self, forgiving God, forgiving others, extending that mercy towards others, it brings about hope. So if you've lost hope, kind of look at your life and reflect, have I needed to forgive some people? Now, they also found that it was linked to meaning. When you forgive, it was linked to meaning. You find meaning in your life. You find this sense of fulfillment, a meaning, a sense of purpose in your life. Forgiveness cannot be void in your life if you're going to have some form of meaning. As a matter of fact, you'll find people, right, that have bitterness and resentment, and they have all of these toxic, retaliating types of behaviors. And what ends up happening is because think about it, you have anger at somebody and it went unchecked. And when it goes unchecked, it goes into unforgiveness. And when you look at people and then that unforgiveness goes unchecked, now it's bitterness, now it's resentment, and it continues and it gets toxic. Pretty soon, now you have hatred. So what happens is you lose meaning of life. Now you have this vendetta, and now you see these people and they're just like, they have this vendetta. They are on one mission, and that is to destroy the person. They are going to destroy the person at any cost. They're going to speak bad about the person at any cost. They're going to defamate the person at any cost. But that's not the meaning of your life. There is more to your life than having this vendetta. I was watching a Netflix show not too long ago, and in this Netflix show, it was this one particular attorney, and he had it in for this one person, and he just disregarded all the evidence that there was. He disregarded that that it could have been so-and-so that maybe committed that murder, or it was so-and-so. No, he disregarded everybody, and he put his eyes on this one person who later on in the show, you find that he had a vendetta against him because this guy, he was in a relationship with this person, and so this attorney liked that girl. And so when you looked at the root cause, it's like, he was really jealous of him. And so now, when you really looked at it from the core, and you looked at it from a root perspective, then you found, oh wow, he was really jealous of him, and all this vendetta that he had against him, and he really lost true meaning. Mind you, this attorney was excellent. He was gifted. He had so many gifts, but he lost meaning, all because he had this unforgiveness towards this guy, and he was just going to go after him. Well, you lose meaning when you think about unforgiveness. When it starts to settle in, it's like you lose meaning. So it's without, I understand now that without forgiveness, we start to lose that meaning of life. Now, Smith and Koenig also found that forgiveness was linked to peace. And when you think about it, it's so true, because peace is such a key component. Inner peace, not talking about external peace, because you can actually have inner peace in the midst of a storm. And that was Jesus. Jesus is our perfect example. He was sleeping in a boat when there was a storm. So to maintain our inner peace, there has to be forgiveness. And tell me if it hasn't happened when we have that unforgiveness and we have that anger, right? We don't really have peace. We're thinking and thinking and thinking about what that person said. We replay it in our minds, what they're doing, what they're saying, right? But when you think of this study, Smith and Koenig, they suggested, right? Hey, add forgiveness to this mental health component, and use forgiveness as a tool, as an avenue, as a way to have mental health in your life, because it's going to bring you peace. It's going to bring you comfort. It's a release. Think about that. And so they've found, right, that church attendance was important too, that this helped people. They're no longer punishing others or punishing themselves, which is unforgiveness. Now, when you don't check, right, because we're kind of constantly having to watch ourselves. Do I have unforgiveness? Is it there? Is it settling? I need to forgive this person. It becomes this lifestyle for us, right? It becomes what Jesus called a lifestyle. Now, I'm not just saying that you become a doormat, and I'm not suggesting that you let everybody run over you and you just turn the other cheek. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you have to even reconcile with everybody. The fact that you forgave does not mean that it's going to lead to reconciliation. There's a difference between restoration and reconciliation and forgiveness. Those three merit a podcast, because just the mere fact that I forgave does not mean that I've got to be in relationship with you. That might be toxic. That might be a codependent relationship. That might be a controlling relationship. It's not healthy for you. So I'm not suggesting that. You could have acquaintances, and there might be a distance, but that doesn't mean that I don't have to forgive you. I may not even tell you that I forgave you, because you may not accept it. The only time, let me pause here. The only time reconciliation can happen between two people is when both parties take responsibility for what they've done. If one party says, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and I shouldn't have done it that way. And then the other person says, I acknowledge my fault as well, then reconciliation can happen. But if there's just one person that's saying, yes, I didn't do everything correctly, I apologize for that. However, if the other party doesn't choose to take ownership of that, humble themselves and acknowledge, wait, you weren't right either. And if you don't have that, and you only have a one way, then reconciliation can happen. But this doesn't mean that you don't forgive. Forgiveness is very personal. It's really key to our mental health. Now, bitterness is one of those things that I want to just kind of introduce, because when we don't check our hearts constantly for this unforgiveness, and we're angry at somebody. So it starts with anger, right? We're just angry at this person, and you're just like, oh, I can't talk about him. Because when I talk about him or I think about it, I get angry. That's a process. So I'm going to have to forgive them maybe daily or every minute. But when we go unchecked, when it comes to this anger, that anger turns to unforgiveness. When that unforgiveness goes unchecked, it goes into bitterness. And bitterness is a root. Think about it as a root. It doesn't overwhelm us all at once. Bitterness is very dangerous because you can't see it. It starts as a root, just like a root. You don't see it right away, but it has a way of sprouting. And all of a sudden, it grows in the soil, watch this, of justification. How do I know that it's starting to spring up? Because I justify myself for everything. And so you find yourself playing the tape over and over and over and over and over, and you're constantly justifying yourself. No, it's because of this. No, and you can never admit that, hey, I've done wrong too. And I haven't done it all right. I'm going to extend that mercy. And so I really want to dive into that bitterness. And I'm going to have some people maybe on the show and really dive into this bitterness thing, because I think sometimes it goes unchecked and then it starts to spring up. I'll leave you with this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "Forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude." Let's journey together. Let's challenge each other, and let's be people that crave, desire mental health, peace, that desire not retaliation, but keep hope alive, that want meaning in life, that want peace and comfort inside of our souls. And let's forgive.